what happened in Egypt between the time of its fall to Assyria and the arrival of Alexander the Great. Let's go over Egypt's late period. In 664 BCE, Egypt emerged from Assyrian domination under the leadership of Psamtik I, founder of the Saite 26th dynasty. Psamtik, initially an Assyrian-installed governor, seized the moment after the foreign army withdrew and asserted independence to reunify a fractured land. According to Herodotus, Psamtik was originally one of several co-rulers, but gained sole power with the help of foreign mercenaries. Over several years, he allied with King Gyges of Lydia for support, a kingdom in Anatolia, who sent Greek and Anatolian mercenaries from Ionia and Caria. Upon victory, Psamtik established his capital at Sais in the western delta. To secure Upper Egypt, Psamtik ousted the lingering influence of the Kushite 25th dynasty. In a shrewd political move, he arranged for his daughter Nitocris to be adopted as the divine wife of Amun, thus gaining control of Theban wealth and authority without resorting to force, just as the Kushite kings had. With this, Thebes acknowledged Saite rule, and Psamtik stationed garrisons through Upper and Middle Egypt to cement unity. Partly in reaction to foreign rule, he encouraged a revival of venerable traditions, and art and religion deliberately harkened back to Old Kingdom models, sparking a renaissance. To display Psamtik's royal curiosity, Herodotus writes that the king pondered what the oldest original human language was. To do this, he conducted an experiment, ordering 2 newborns to be raised in total silence on a remote estate. A single shepherd tended them, forbidden to speak, sing, or even utter a sound in their presence, only feed them goat's milk. When the babies were about 2 years old, they reportedly burst out with the word bekos when the shepherd opened the hut. Court scholars told Psamtik that bekos was the Phrygian word for bread. Therefore, Psamtik concludes that the Phrygians, a people of central Anatolia, must be older than the Egyptians, humorously undercutting Egyptian pride. This would be the first psycholinguistic experiment in history, but the tale is almost certainly legend or allegorical. Psamtik also maintained authority by forming a Greek mercenary corps to balance the native military class, settling these mercenaries in the eastern delta. These mercenaries helped him expand into the Levant as the Assyrian Empire faded. For the first time in centuries, Egypt was unified under a strong native dynasty and could pursue its own policies. Later generations looked back on the Saite period as a golden age, and even subsequent rulers imitated Saite artistic forms as classic Egyptian style. For those who don't know, our channel tries to share history from all over the world, but have never done ad reads or spoken to advertisers. All we ask is to subscribe if you enjoy these historical journeys, and if possible, consider becoming a member, and we can finish this project together. Psamtik, along with his successors, enjoyed almost a century and a half of stable Saite rule, marked by economic prosperity and artistic output, even a little bit of cautious foreign ambition. Psamtik's son, Necho II, continued the revival and engaged Egypt in the geopolitics of the Near East. Necho famously hired Phoenician sailors for a legendary voyage around Africa and began a grand project to link the Nile to the Red Sea by canal. By this time, the Neo-Assyrian Empire had all but fallen, broken to pieces by a Babylonian uprising and an invasion by the Medes, an Iranian people. The last Assyrian king had been driven out of power and appealed Necho for aid. The Egyptian king granted it, aiming to add buffer territories between him and these new Iron Age empires. In 609, he ventured north into the Levant, where he defeated King Josiah of Judah at another battle of Megiddo. He continued marching north and linked up with Assyrian troops. Together they tried unsuccessfully to retake the last Assyrian stronghold of Haran from a Babylonian and Mede occupation, but they had to flee to the well-fortified city of Carchemish on the Euphrates. After a surprise attack, Necho's forces were ultimately routed by Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar II. Babylon's victory wiped out the last Assyrian army and ended Egypt's brief return to Near East power politics. Nebuchadnezzar followed down the Levant, significantly crippling the Egyptian army at Hamath. But the Egyptians made a last stand on their borders, chasing the Babylonians back. Though the pharaoh retook Gaza, native Egyptian dynasties would never venture up the Levant again. Domestically, Saite Egypt's prosperity owes much to its openness with the wider Mediterranean world. Greeks and Carians were allowed to settle and trade. Memphis housed quarters for Greeks, Carians, and Phoenicians. Despite this influx, the Saite rulers remained staunchly Egyptian in identity and policy. They patronized Egyptian religious institutions lavishly, donating land and wealth to temples. Festivals, oracles, and temple rites thrived with elite sponsorship during the Renaissance, and ordinary people participated fervently in cult events and pilgrimages. A vivid reflection of this is the resurgence of the Apis bull cult at Memphis. Apis bulls, considered the herald and an aspect of the god Ptah, were mummified with a great ceremony and interred in huge granite sarcophagi in the Serapeum of Saqqara, often accompanied by stelae proclaiming the devotion of Saite pharaohs and officials. Politically, the Saite dynasty trod a careful line between assertion and caution. After Necho, Psamtik II undertook a major campaign south into Nubia, around 593 BCE, penetrating the kingdom of Kush. This expedition, evidenced by inscriptions left by Greek mercenaries at Abu Simbel, resulted in the sack of Napata. In the Levant, Psamtik and his successors mainly sought to defend Egypt's frontier. Apis, the next pharaoh, intervened in the Near East, sending aid to a beleaguered Jerusalem against Babylon. This didn't succeed, and after a long siege, Babylon captured Jerusalem and was soon at Egypt's doorstep. Apis and his mercenaries managed to fend off this invasion, but the loss of influence in the Levant was a major political blow. In the west, he fought Greek colonists in Libya, but a crushing defeat at the Battle of Erasa led to domestic unrest. The disaster sparked a revolt, and Apis was overthrown by his general Amasis, who claimed the throne in 570. Amasis proved an able ruler, presiding over the last flourishing of native Egypt. He encouraged agriculture and trade, embellished temples, and continued the pro-Greek policy by marrying a Greek princess and honoring Greek oracles. He also famously granted Greeks a commercial enclave at Naucratis in the Delta. Naucratis became a bustling Greek trading post, funneling Hellenic goods and influences into Egypt, while Egyptian grain and linen flowed outward. So prosperous was Egypt under Amasis that Herodotus describes the period as one of merriment and plenty. In art, Amasis's time and the final Saite decades maintained the high level of craftsmanship, and later generations would collect Saite statues as prized antiquities. Relief art and temple architecture equally flourished. One striking example is the Palace of Apis at Memphis, where relief blocks show scenes of kingship rituals modelled on early dynastic precedents. Temples functioned as economic powerhouses and centres of learning during this time, with the House of Life in many complexes busily copying older texts and creating new ones. In the late period, we see the high point of the animal cults. Vast catacombs were filled with millions of animals that represented their gods, like ibises, falcons, cats, and dogs offered to gods like Thoth, Horus, Bastet, and Anubis. Common people could partake in temple religion by purchasing and dedicating animal mummies to the gods, confident in gaining divine favor. But while Egypt enjoyed a late flourishing, storm clouds gathered in the east. Not from the Neo-Babylonians, but under the burgeoning Persian Empire. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, sought to conquer the Nile domain. Amasis had made an alliance with Lydia to resist Persia, but both Babylon and the Anatolian kingdom fell to the Persians, and Amasis died at the brink of invasion. This left Psamtik III, his son, to face the onslaught alone. In 525 BCE, Cambyses II of Persia invaded Egypt. The decisive Battle of Pelusium saw the Egyptian army defeated, and after a siege, Memphis fell to the Persians. Later legend states that the Persians advanced behind cats at the Battle of Pelusium, as the Egyptians regarded them as sacred and were hesitant to attack. Psamtik III was captured and later forced to commit suicide after inciting a rebellion. The long line of native pharaohs was abruptly broken, ending the Saite line and making Egypt a province or satrapy of the Achaemenid Empire. Cambyses adopted the pharaonic titles, which ushered in Dynasty 27, but unlike previous foreign rulers, like the Libyans or Nubians, the Persians ruled as distant overlords, with Egypt merely one satrapy among many. A Persian governor, or satrap, ruled from Memphis, while Cambyses and his successors focused on imperial affairs in Persepolis and Susa. Early on, Cambyses' rule earned infamy in Egyptian memory, accused of impiety and madness, claiming he slew the sacred Apis bull and insulted Egyptian gods. Modern evidence suggests a nuanced picture. An Apis bull did die during Cambyses' reign in 524, but records show it received full burial rites, indicating Cambyses did allow traditional cults to continue. Nevertheless, Egyptian temples suddenly saw resources cut, fostering resentment among the clergy. Cambyses remained in Egypt for several years to secure his conquest, during which time at least one major native rebellion flared. In 522, a rebel pharaoh, Petubastis III, possibly a member of the old 26th dynasty, led a revolt in the western desert oases, possibly inspiring the tale of Cambyses' lost army in the sands. According to Herodotus, this great force of 50,000 was sent to the Siwa oasis to subjugate the oracle of Amun, but they all mysteriously disappeared in the desert. The most likely story is that an army was defeated by Petubastis, and the story of them disappearing in a sandstorm was created later for propaganda purposes. Cambyses left Egypt under tumultuous conditions and died en route to Persia in 522. Under Darius I, Persian rule in Egypt took a more conciliatory turn. Darius deliberately cultivated Egyptian goodwill and sought to present himself as a traditional pharaoh. He reportedly codified Egyptian laws and notably completed a canal from the Nile to the Red Sea to facilitate trade. Darius also initiated building projects, restored temples, and even built a new temple to Amun in the Karga oasis, the Temple of Hybis. Egyptians of later generations remembered Darius as one of the few foreign kings who did right by Egypt. His statue, quarried in Egypt but later found at Susa, dramatically embodies the Persian king's adoption of Egyptian imagery, carved in hard stone, with hieroglyphic inscriptions naming Egyptian deities. It shows Darius in Persian dress, but on an Egyptian-style base, showcasing two horizontal rows of small kneeling men, representing the Persian Empire's far-reaching provinces. Fewer large-scale royal monuments were erected by the Achaemenid rulers. Instead, artistic energy is seen in smaller objects, like this cosmetic container in the shape of Bes, an Egyptian deity of households, bronze divine statuettes, and papyri with demotic texts proliferated. Demotic was a kind of Egyptian script which evolved from the hieratic system used on papyrus since the Old Kingdom, but became more associated with priests and temples. In the late period, Demotic emerged as the script of the people and government. During the uncertainty of Persian rule and subsequent turbulence, Egyptians turned to their gods for guidance. Religious life in this twilight period was intensely vibrant. The priesthood regained influence, and oracular practices thrived once more. Priests linked local deities to canonical Golden Age gods to assert continuity, leading to a peak in syncretic gods. Ptah, creator and craftsman, Sokar, a Memphite funerary hawk, and Osiris, lord of the dead, was merged into a single guarantee of resurrection. Temples across the country recorded questions posed to oracles on matters from inheritance disputes to plans of rebellion. The fame of some oracles extended beyond Egypt. The oracle of Amun at Siwa, in Libya's desert, was renowned internationally. Common people participated in pilgrimages and popular oracle consultations. Inscriptions speak of individuals addressing petitions or letters to the gods seeking guidance. The gods were not distant. They were thought to intervene directly in everyday life, whether through healing, advice, or omens. In one stark example, during the Persian occupation, an oracle at the temple of Khnum at Elephantine assured the locals that the god still listened to their prayers even as they endured foreign rule, offering a spiritual resistance of sorts. After the death of Darius in 486, Xerxes I dealt with Egypt more harshly. He crushed a major rebellion at the start of his reign and installed his brother as satrap, raising taxes and ending the milder arrangements Egypt had enjoyed under his predecessor. Large royal building projects stopped, and later Egyptian tradition remembered Xerxes as a neglectful, even impious overlord. Egypt saw repeated revolts against his rule. The most famous was led by a Libyan prince named Inaros, who around 460 allied with Athens to rebel. Inaros actually managed to rule much of the delta for several years, and even killed a Persian satrap in battle. Eventually he was betrayed and executed in 454 BCE, but unrest continued. Another delta rebel, Amerteus of Sais, kept resistance alive in the western delta swamps, launching a rebellion against the next Persian emperor, and a failed Greek invasion, which left Egypt destabilized and the Persians scrambling. Amerteus declared himself pharaoh in 404, expelling the Persians. His success ended the 27th dynasty and over a century of Persian occupation. Egypt enjoyed independence once more under native rulers. But for how long? Amerteus, as founder of the 28th dynasty, also had the distinction of being the only pharaoh of his line. Little is recorded of his reign, but his rise signified a wave of Egyptian nationalism. Not long into his reign, Amerteus was challenged by a rival family from Mendes in the eastern delta. Greek writers imply a violent clash ensued, and Amerteus was seized and executed by Nefertiti. Control then passed to the 29th dynasty, based in Mendes. But these reigns were short-lived and marked by instability. After Nefertiti, a turbulent year saw his son Hakor overthrown by Samothrace, before in turn being ousted by Hakor. The throne was once more stable, as Hakor reigned for 13 of the dynasty's 18 total years, fortifying Egypt and allying with Sparta and Athens against Persia. But his son, Nefertiti II, was ineffectual, and in 380 BCE, an army general named Nectanebo seized power, founding the 30th dynasty at Sebennytos. Nectanebo successfully repelled a Persian invasion, a remarkable feat achieved with the aid of Persian infighting and the Nile's own floodwaters. This victory secured a decade of relative calm in which Nectanebo launched the last great Egyptian temple boom. He began the first pylon and the avenue of sphinxes at Karnak, erected a stone sanctuary to Isis on Philae, and funded refurbishments from Sebennytos in the delta to Komombo in Upper Egypt. His son and short-lived successor Teos continued some building, but siphoned wealth out of temples in order to finance an ambitious anti-Persian expedition. He left his brother in charge in Egypt, as he allied with the Spartan king and an Athenian general, reaching as far as Phoenicia with little effort. But back in Egypt, his brother had other plans. He convinced his son to usurp the throne, and the Spartan king recognized it. Teos, with no safe haven, fled to Susa, where he was captured and sent back to Egypt in chains. The revival of temple building reached its zenith under this third pharaoh, Nectanebo II. He has the distinction of being the last native pharaoh of Egypt. Under Nectanebo II, the architectural revival peaked. He completed many of his grandfather's projects, added kiosks and gateways, and inscribed hard stone statues in a consciously archaic Saite-style script. presenting himself as guardian of Egypt's timeless divine order against renewed Persian pressure. Together, the two Nectanebos shaped Dynasty 30 into a last flourish of native piety and building, a deliberate defensive renaissance that invoked Egypt's own history to strengthen morale. Despite these artistic and spiritual efforts, the menace of Persia had not vanished. After several failed attempts, the Persians under Artaxerxes III launched a more forceful campaign, and in 343 BCE managed to reconquer Egypt. Nectanebo II, betrayed by some of his Greek mercenaries, was defeated and fled. Legend says he sought refuge in Nubia. The Second Persian occupation, or Dynasty 31, began with a vengeance. Artaxerxes III, upon capturing Pelusium and Memphis in 343 BCE, is said to have treated Egypt harshly. Ancient reports, perhaps biased, claim he sacked temples, confiscated their wealth, and brutally punished resistance. The brief Second Persian domination saw two more Persian kings after Artaxerxes, his son Artaxerxes IV and Darius III. But their hold on the Nile was fragile. Egyptians had not forgotten their liberty, and nearly every class of society resented the foreign yoke. It didn't take long for the administrative conditions to deteriorate, as heavy taxation and the presence of Persian garrisons made them increasingly unpopular. But while the first Persian occupation lasted over a century, this second occupation was only a decade long, thanks to the arrival of a certain Macedonian general. When Alexander the Great approached Egypt in 332 BCE, fresh off defeating Darius's forces in Syria, the country offered no resistance. The Persian satrap Mazaches simply surrendered to Alexander without a fight. After 132 total years under Persian rulers, Egypt was liberated by the Macedonian conqueror. Alexander's arrival was met with overt joy by Egyptians, who saw him as a deliverer from Persian tyranny. In November, Alexander was crowned in Memphis with the double crown, receiving the titles of a native king. In a savvy move, Alexander went to the great oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis in the western desert. There, Egyptian priests proclaimed him the son of Amun and legitimate pharaoh. Oracles must still have had profound influence, that even a Greek outsider could cement his rule through an Egyptian oracle's endorsement. Alexander treated Egyptian religion with respect, sacrificing to Apis and rebuilding temples, and installed Macedonian, but also some Egyptian officials to govern. The late period ended not in fire and ruin, but with a surprisingly smooth transition to what would become the Ptolemaic era. When the Assyrians captured Egypt in 663 BCE, the Kushite pharaoh Tantamani was expelled from Thebes, and Nubia's 25th dynasty rule in Egypt ended. The kings retreated to their heartland in Upper Nubia, continuing rule from Napata. During this time, descendants of the pharaohs Taharqa and Tantamani maintained an Egyptian-style state. They viewed themselves as heirs of the Empire of the Nile and guardians of the Amun cult at Jebel Barkal. In their royal inscriptions, carved in Egyptian hieroglyphs, these kings often listed the titles of the pharaohs and sometimes alluded to a theoretical claim over Egypt. In reality, direct attempts to reinvade Egypt were rare and unsuccessful. It was the Nubians who were on the receiving end. Around 593, Psamtik II of Egypt marched deep into Nubia. The Egyptians fought a battle near the Third Cataract and went as far as Napata, which they sacked, looting temples, possibly removing divine images. Shortly thereafter, the Kushite king, Aspelta, began moving administrative buildings further south to Meroë, far beyond the reach of Egyptian armies. This new site, located between the 5th and 6th cataracts, had strategic and economic advantages. It lay in a region of savanna with more reliable summer rains, suitable for agriculture without Nile inundation. It was rich in iron ore and timber for fueling smelters, leading the Greeks and Romans to later call this region the island of Meroë, famed for iron and war elephants. Napata would still remain the spiritual capital, though. The priesthood of Amun at Jebel Barkal wielded great influence, and oracles of Amun reportedly even determined royal succession. The Stele of Espelta describes how oracles and consultations among chiefs in Napata led to Espelta's selection as king, suggesting that the god Amun's voice, through the oracle, had a key role in choosing the ruler, a very different model from Egypt's hereditary kingship, yet still couched in Egyptian religious terms. We don't know much about the Kushite kings following Espelta, but it's clear they continued many pharaonic traditions, like the pyramid building at Nuri. The third phase of transitional kings, like Hasiotef and Nastasin, kept Kush robust and expansive. King Hasiotef recorded in his lengthy inscription that he led numerous campaigns, from subduing nomads deep in Africa to asserting control as far north as the First Cataract. Nastasin boasted of battles won in Lower Nubia and claimed to have seized boats and treasure from an invader from Egypt. Tellingly, Nastasin's stele, found at Dongola, between the Third and Fifth Cataracts, is the last lengthy royal text in Egyptian hieroglyphs in Nubia. He was the last Kushite ruler buried with a pyramid at Nuri with the Napatan kings. This short period of revival ended, and the last phase of Napatan kings are not well attested. What we do know is by around 270 BCE, the Kushite kingdom's center of gravity fully shifted to Meroë, which became the official royal burial ground. One theory for this final shift is found in a famous story recorded by Diodorus Siculus. A Kushite king Agamemnes, often identified with Arakamani, defied the priests of Amun, who previously could command kings to commit ritual suicide when demanded. The king, fed up with their political power, reportedly went into the temple and slew the priests. This tale, whether literally true or not, symbolizes the end of the Napatan theocracy. It implies that the kings no longer wished to be subordinate to the Amun priesthood of Napata. In archaeological terms, we do see one of the first kings to be buried at Meroë was Arakamani, the king identified with Agamemnes, and whose name signified a new era. By being buried here, the monarchs asserted independence from Napata's clergy and established a new royal cult site. Meroë, with its flatter, more open landscape, eventually hosted many dozens of steep-sided pyramids on sandy hills, the distinct Meroitic pyramids that still awe visitors today. The Meroitic period brought significant cultural shifts and a national evolution, perhaps the most momentous being in language and the development of its own indigenous writing system. Kushite civilization, while born from Egyptian influence, entered a new era, apart from their northern neighbor. Egypt, by reviving its past to face the future, and Nubia, by carrying the torch of that past to create a new future of its own. As Alexander entered Egypt, he stepped into a land still vibrant with pharaonic tradition. But after nearly 3,000 years, never again would it be ruled by a native Egyptian pharaoh.